Cheat Code, Support Strategist by My Head in the Clouds Not Coming Down. Read by Rat Overlord. Chapter 21, Dust and Ashes. Summary: Isuku changes up the levels. Alright, villain, you want to treat this like a game? Then let's play. Netsu felt a thrill at his protégé's words and couldn't help the sharp smile that came to his face even as his co-workers shivered. He wasn't 100% sure what had prompted the challenge, since Midoriya's near-constant mutterings had trailed off after giving a passing analysis of who appeared to be the villain's leader, but whatever was about to happen, it was simply sure to be marvelous. Netsu had never been more grateful than he was at that moment for his protégé's mumbling habit. For never having received any training when it came to the men in the chair position, as it was often fondly called, Midoriya was doing remarkably well. When he addressed the comments to the heroes, Netsu had noted that he was trying to pick the largest threats and most relevant details to mention, all while keeping his head and hacking through the system. Whatever small details his student happened to leave out were covered up by his unintentional mutterings, so it all worked out. Netsu had been a tad concerned when Midoriya had identified the glitch as the effects of a technopathic quirk, but it turns out that his worries were unfounded, as his student had bypassed even that challenge with little issue. He was so proud. He sounds so confident, All Might noted. He should, Midnight whispered back. He beat a technology quirk from the inside of the system. And if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't know about the attack at all. President Mike looked slightly pale, most likely wondering if the next thing Midoriya reported would be his husband's murder. Never having had interest in romantic connections himself, Netsu couldn't even imagine what he must be going through. All they could do now, however, was get there as quickly as possible and trust Midoriya to handle the rest. Isuku checked the cameras just to make sure that Eraserhead was still going strong before turning his attention to the students. The plaza wasn't a disaster zone, so he didn't have nearly enough control of it to do anything useful, and if Eraserhead was here with them, he'd probably insist that Isuku help the students first. Prioritize the rescue, after all. The students in the shipwreck zone seemed to be at the most immediate danger. There were 2 students, a girl with a frog quirk and a boy with adhesive hairballs, if Isuku remembered correctly. The frog girl could probably jump to safety with little issue, but the boy was panicking too much for her to do anything without leaving him behind, something that wasn't helped by the fact that the ship was literally sinking. It must have been one of the villain's quirks that damaged it, and yep, they all had quirks that took advantage of the water. Okay, easy enough, Isuku muttered. Let's see how useful your quirks are without any water. Isuku hit a key and the pool started draining. It was slow going at first, and Isuku almost worried that the water level would go down too fast enough to do any good, until he noticed that one of the drain settings was labeled Whirlpool. Isuku clicked on it. I wonder what that does. It was as if the gates of hell had opened up beneath the villains as the water began to vortex down towards the drain. The villains were yelling, accusing one another of manipulating the water and creating enough general confusion that the frog girl was able to grab the ball boy by the waist and jump them both to safety. As they passed overhead, the boy started throwing his balls to the villains in panic. Isuku almost wanted to facepalm. What kind of idiot thought it was a good idea to call attention to themselves during a villain attack? It ended up working out even better than Isuku could have hoped for, though, since the balls followed the flow of the water, brushing up against the villains and making them stick to each other. By the time the 2 students had reached the relative safety of the shore, the pool was almost entirely empty, and the villains had somehow formed a ball of bodies that would almost be impossible to escape unless those balls somehow lost their stickiness, which, according to Isuku's analysis of the ball boy's quirk, wouldn't be happening anytime soon. Well, 1 zone down, and a lot of others to go. Todoroki seemed to have things handled in the landslide zone, and Katsuki would probably just get mad if he received any help in the ruin zone, so that only left the fire zone, the downpour zone, and the mountain zone for Isuku to choose from. Izu-kun! He startled as Mei slammed the door to his office open. Hanzo is a boring class rep! He won't even let me make a little fire! Not now, Mei-chan, Isuku said distractedly. The kid with the tail quirk, Ojiro? He was fighting alone in the fire zone, and there was a guy approaching him from behind. Mei came up behind him. Is that... The USJ. Isuku took control of one of the flamethrowers and turned it up to high. Oshiro whirled around as he heard the villain scream, but couldn't waste too much time figuring out what had happened since the villain was already running towards him, using some kind of telekinesis to control the flames. It was supposed to be a standard rescue exercise for 1A, but... Mei was silent for a long moment as Isuku cut off all the fire within 50 feet of Oshiro and his current opponent. The villain's eyes widened in shock as his entire weapon supply disappeared before he could blink, but Oshiro was the first to recover, using his tail like a whip to knock the guy out. "What can I do to help?" Isuku glanced over at his best friend, surprised to see her looking serious for one of the first times since he'd met her. It would have been enough to creep him out if he couldn't see the familiar gleam of determination and passion in her eyes as they quickly zoomed in and out, flicking rapidly between the different screens as she took in all the different details. "Close the door. We don't want to panic the other students." As Mei complied, he turned his attention back to the fire zone. Ojiro had started running after he took out of his last opponent, but he obviously didn't know where he was going because he was just running deeper and deeper into the maze. He sensed Mei behind him again, so he jerked his head towards the extra chair sitting against the wall and slid over to give her some room to sit beside him. With one hand, Isuku grabbed one of the earpieces from the box Powerloader had left on his desk, and with the other, he created a wall of flames right in Ojiro's path to force him to turn tail. Good. He was heading in the right direction now. Isuku threw the comm to Mei right as she sat down. "Channel 3. Controls are on the side. I've already gotten access to disaster zones, and the teachers are on their way, so we just need to keep the students alive until they can get there." Mei grinned as she plugged in another keyboard and pulled it towards her. "So, I do get to make explosions?" Isuku couldn't help but smile back. "As many as you want. Here, you can use the fire and downpour zones. I've been using fire to guide Ojiro, that's the student with the tail, to the exit. I don't know how the ones in the downpour zone are doing, though." "Leave it to me, Isuku," Mei cackled, using a flamethrower to keep Ojiro from turning down into a dead end. "This is so much more fun than listening to the class rep!" "Midoriya." Powerloader somehow managed to sound both amused and exasperated. "Did you really need to give Hatsume access to more dangerous experiments?" "Oh!" Mei exclaimed. "Are those the teachers? Hi, Powerloader!" "If she handles 2 zones, I can focus on the mountain zone and the plaza," Isuku explained simply. "Don't worry, Mei-chan knows destruction better than almost anyone I know." Powerloader groaned. That's what I'm worried about." Isuku turned his attention to the mountain zone just in time to see the girl with the earphone jack quirk, Jiro, push the electricity boy in the path of one of the villains, which didn't make any sense until the villain went down. Isuku rolled his eyes as the boy with the electricity quirk gave the girls a confident thumbs up. Was his name Kaminari? Anyway, how much control did Isuku have? A full earthquake would mess up the students as well, so he should try and avoid that, but that would work. As the villain swung to attack the creation quirk user, Midnight had totally helped design that costume, hadn't she? Whatever, not important right now. Just as the villain was about to land a hit, he found himself launched into the air as a pillar of rock suddenly popped up out of the ground directly beneath him. Isuku grinned. The teachers probably used this feature most likely to change the landscape and give the upperclassmen a variety of landscapes and obstacles without having to constantly rely on Cementoss's quirk. But he could use it to, well, quite literally trip up the invaders, considering that he'd raised up a small ledge and made one of the villains fall flat on their face as they ran towards Jiro. Keeping one eye on the mountain zone, Isuku glanced over towards the plaza. "Netsu, is there anything I can use in the plaza? The only thing I see is the fountain, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be very useful, and I don't think the villains have noticed yet, but Eraserhead is starting to slow down." There was a small gasp on the other end of the line, but Isuku couldn't tell from which teacher it was. Vaguely, Isuku was aware that one of the Mountain Zone villains had popped up out of the ground and was making their way towards the plaza as well. Finally, Nedzi spoke up. "There's not any disaster simulations there, but every building has campus defense systems, so you can access them." "All right, weapons?" Isuku muttered and poked around for a moment. "Perfect, found them." "Good," Nedzi said. "Now, be aware that most of the firepower is not as precise as the situation requires, and that the more lethal options might take a few minutes to warm up. Be careful, Midoriya." Isugu nodded, his throat suddenly feeling very dry. Oh, okay. That's a lot of pressure.
Says the kid who's already started fighting back.
Hound Dog growled.
Don't overthink it, kid. Just do your best and save who you can. Everything else will come later.
Isugu glanced at May, who nodded to him firmly, and he felt a flood of determination take over him. Yes, sir. I'll do my best. He took a moment to look over his weapons options, deciding to use the guns only as a last resort. It looked like the best option that he had was some sort of weighted net. He shot one experimentally at a knot of villains that was standing far enough away from the fight that Isugu didn't have to worry about hitting Eraserhead. The net hit the group head-on, and instantly, all action stopped as everyone in the plaza turned to look and tried to figure out where the net had come from. The leader started scratching at his neck again. After his initial success, Isugu was feeling a little more confident, so he aimed another net at the leader. If he could trap him, then... Isugu fired, only for the net to disappear in a purple portal right before it hit its target. Another portal appeared near Eraserhead, and the net came flying out, forcing him to dodge. Isugu grimaced. Sorry, my bad. The warp villain appeared next to the leader, looking a bit worse for wear from his fight with the students at the entrance. Isugu noticed a few purple balls stuck to the armor of his neck, along with chunks of concrete, so the two students in the shipwreck zone must have made it to the entrance and started helping with the fight there. The two villains seemed to be talking, so Isugu scrambled to access the audio from the plaza, turning it up loud enough for both him and May to hear the conversation.
Allowed one of the students to escape, Shigaraki.
The villain warp's quirk was deep and smooth. It would almost be calming if it didn't belong to a villain.
He will almost definitely raise the alarm, which means that the heroes will be here soon.
Isugu glanced over at the cameras for the entrance. Which student has escaped? Oh, that was perfect! The student with the engine quirk escaped, Isugu told the teachers. He should be heading your way now. Good, Netsu said. That means that the villains won't be expecting us so quickly. Notify us if anything else changes. Yes, sir. The leader was scratching his neck hard enough to bleed.
If you weren't our escape, I'd dust you right now, Kurogiri. And tell me, why is it that the information we got was so far off? I was told that this would be a mob raid, so how come this level is acting more like a tower defense?
Isugu gulped. They had noticed his interference. He shook his head and forced himself to focus on the hints of the leader's quirk. He had said something about dust, so did he have a quirk that allowed for dust manipulation? If so, Isugu would need to limit the destruction in the plaza. The villain that Isugu had seen escape from the mountain zone stepped between the two leaders and interrupted their conversation.
We have a problem. I don't know how, because I haven't deactivated my quirk since I stepped through the portal, but someone from the outside got through, and it seems to be that they're using this building to fight back.
The lead villain, Shigaraki, if Isugu had heard correctly, suddenly stilled.
So what you're saying is that someone is using cheat codes?
The warp villain, Kurogiri, apparently, interrupted the blocker's confusion with an air of professionality.
I don't suppose that there's a way to tell where the interference is coming from. A set of coordinates would be most appreciated.
Shigaraki whirled to pin the blocker with a manic stare, only partially visible behind the creepy hand that the villain was using as a mask.
Yes! Tell us where the cheater is, now!
Isugu forgot how to breathe, and he could barely hear May's gasp beside him as she moved to crush his hand. If they figured out that they were in the main school, then they could work to get them, which would put the rest of the student body in danger. The teachers were all gone to handle the attack, and if the location of the attack changed, they wouldn't be able to get here in time. The blocker took a hesitant step back and raised his hands nervously.
That's not how my quirk works. I can block certain kinds of electronic signals, but I'm not a tracker. Even if I could track the interference like that, I'd end up with an IP address, which doesn't necessarily tell you where the computer is physically located.
Shigaraki took his hand away from his neck and spread his fingers.
Then what are you even good for?
Before Isugu could even react, Shigaraki lunged and gripped the blocker's face. A strangled scream left the man's mouth before it was cut off, as first his mouth, then his vocal cords, then his lungs disintegrated beneath the villain's touch. Within 30 seconds, the only thing left of the blocker was a pile of bones, blood, and
dust.
Isugu breathed.